One of the first 6 levels, I ask you to purchase 6 Secrets of Raising Capital by Bill Fisher. This book is incredible. It is the book that was essentially my go-to over and over and over and over and over in my AirPods when I was walking around London, going to work. When I was fundraising, this book was everything to me. It was my source of truth. I studied it. I know it back and forth, and it's just an unbelievable book. The guy's raised hundreds of millions of dollars. He knows what he's talking about. He's worked with some of the best startups. It's a little old school, but that's why I like it, because it's not talking about, texting. It's not talking about all this modern stuff. It's just giving you the fundamentals of fundraising. So his key point, and this brings me to my point today, is storytelling. So it seems silly. It is the most important thing when it comes to building a good fundraise. You have to have a strong base. And if you read that book, he says, great businesses don't raise capital, great stories do. I agree. So the reason why this works is because the story allows one person you tell it to then go tell it to their friends. And that snowball is what creates the network effect when you're investor networking and closing, because you're going to have to literally talk to about 100 investors over the next 3 to 6 months, at least. And I'm going to show you how, but not the point. Point is, we need a good story. A lot of investors, a lot of founders think that you start with a pitch deck. You don't. You start with a headline only slide deck. Headline only. What that means is the only text on the entire deck, there's not a single image, only text is just the big headline. Why are we doing that? Because we need to make sure that our story has the right story arc from start to finish. This part is fun. You are Edgar Allan Poe. You are Mark Twain. Your whole goal is to tell a very compelling story just through the headlines. So the whole story from start to finish in a 10 slide deck is 10 headlines. So it's 10 sentences essentially. Refine this. Go talk with people. Go through the story. This little nugget, although it might not seem like it right now, is going to be the most important part of this whole process, because that little nugget of a story that people are interested in, that hook, that psychological hook, is what gets emails to be opened. It's what gets investors to say, hey, friend, I just saw this really cool company and they're doing XYZ, right? Like that little story hook is what carries on the points throughout this process. It also allows you to deliver an elevator pitch, because the hook and that little nugget is like a sentence or two. It's that important and it's that simple, but it is very complex to actually whittle our story down to just know exactly at the heart of it what attracts investors. So we're going to start with the headline deck. After that, we're going to move to wireframe deck. So think of drafting our story and creating our pitch deck a lot like building a startup or a product. The headline deck is our prototype. The wireframe deck is the wireframes, or the MVP, right? So now we've figured out a little bit by having something in the wild, we iterate and bring that into the wireframes. After the wireframe is the rough deck. The rough deck, again, being iterated on throughout this entire process with feedback from people, real life people. That rough deck is going to be thing we give to the designer. So essentially that rough deck is your alpha. It's like there, it's done. You see what it's going to be, but it's not designed and beautiful yet. Actual design final deck is your, beta launch product, or you could even say your first product. But that's essentially what a deck is. And each time you build a deck, you go through that same iteration process, just like startups. You get investor feedback, just like startups, you get customer feedback, same thing. So that's what we're going to do for the next 16 levels, I believe it is. So strap in, let's get the deck done. And then once we're done with the deck, we never need to touch it again. We move on to the investor part of this process, which is investor pipeline management, investor networking, cold outreach, hot outreach, Don intros, all the stuff you want. So get through this part and be focused. Let's go. Now that you have your headline only story done and it's been refined to some extent, it's now time to put that into the wireframe. So the wireframe, listen to me, stick with me here. The wireframe is the headline, which we just created, and it is the layout of how we're going to display the information with a general idea of what that information is. Not going to have full numbers yet, not going to have full stats, facts, but this is the visual story layout that we're going to tell. I gave you a template. That template has fill in the blank area, and the template has created my own using that template to show you what it looks like to have a wireframe deck. And so you can download both files. What I would suggest doing is taking the template deck on the left, take my example deck on the right, and slide by slide, go through each one and try to get into my mind of how I was doing that. As a reminder, This wireframe deck is not your finished deck. It's not going to have all the right information in there. This is just a part of the iteration process as we get towards a really well-designed, useful deck. So go download the template, go download the example, and then create your own wireframe deck and come to the group meeting and let's go over it. All right, adios.